Hi everybody, this is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Welcome to another critical thought. For this episode, first, I think my face is extra red. We're in the middle of a heat wave, so don't mind my strawberry complexion today. But for today's thought, I'm going to talk about pacing or gating of mechanics. And that's why today's prop here is of Mario. Well, Amiibo Mario, but it serves the purpose. Gating mechanics is a very important part not just of game design, but of building out levels to properly introduce elements to players. And I've played a lot of games that have either suffered or rise to the occasion. And Mario over there is a really good example of rising. Recently, I played Oddworld's New and Tasty, which there will be a spotlight video up on the channel real soon. And one of the problems that I ran into was that they introduced mechanics and mechanics and rules to the game without properly introducing them to the player. For instance, Abe, for those of you who never played the original Oddworld, Abe has the ability to mind control enemies as long as he chants long enough to basically pull it off. The mechanic is introduced from the start of the game, at least I'm playing on hard mode, but the game never references it. So for a new player, they won't have any idea that there's such a mechanic until it actually gets brought up, I believe, in Chapter 2, 2.5 of the game. Now, that is not a good example of gating. The purpose of gating mechanics and level design is to introduce systems to the player in a logical order so that they can understand the basics before moving on to moderate lessons, before they move on to advanced lessons. And Super Mario, with all the games, are really good examples of this. Nintendo has gotten really good at using their level designs to gate the challenge and the mechanics required by the player. Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 are two of my favorite games of all time because of this. The levels are organic enough that any player can get through them using different mechanics or different skill levels, but at the same time, their basic foundation basically grows and escalates as this game goes on. When you start playing the first level, it pretty much asks you to move and jump. That's about it. There's nothing more you need. By the end of a Super Mario Galaxy game, you're going to be doing wall jumps, triple jumps into spin jumps, into wall jumps, into probably another spin jump, stuff like that. And it's where Nintendo really gets to cut loose with their level designs. But what makes it such a brilliant example is that the game is gated enough so that players are just passively taught all these lessons until they get to the end where it's then essentially forced upon them. But it's not really seen as a difficulty spike because the player's been training this way from the get-go. And that's why a good gating system is very important, especially when you have either unique game mechanics, such as in a game like Portal or the Swapper. I almost call it the Portal. Or in strategy games or very complex titles, such as the 4X genre, anything from Paradox Interactive. Now, of course, having said that, I'm sure some of you are going to point out that there's a big problem. You can't properly gate mechanics in a strategy game because they're all about the integration of all these systems together. For instance, imagine playing a game like Civilization and they don't introduce research until 50 turns in. But you can use gating in the form of tutorial design. And a really good example of that would be Off-World Trading Company, which I did a spotlight of on the channel here and a live play with Soren Johnson. What they did was gate the tutorial into several aspects. Each episode basically focusing on a part of the game. So you had like the beginning, the middle, and so on and so on. And essentially you're doing different things in each tutorial, but they're framed in the order of how you would play the game. So tutorial 1 is all about picking where you want to found your base. Nothing else, no decision about what buildings put down, nothing talking about how you win the game. It's just what are you doing for the first 5 minutes of the play. And then the second tutorial talks about, okay, now you've done that, here's what you do next. And by gating it in this way, the player is able to see how the rules work and start to understand how things are supposed to be played. It's the same thing that goes back with Super Mario. Even with games, with any of the Mario games, there's always been that element of gating with the levels. Even though Super Mario Sunshine may be considered, it's sometimes considered, I think, the black sheep of the Mario games. I know some people like it, some people hate it. It also did a good job of, again, showing off how you would play Mario and then gating that through the levels. And once again, the levels in the beginning ask less of the player compared to the ones at the end, but those options are still available and open to the player. It's not like Nintendo says, oh, you're not allowed to triple jump until World 3, and you can't do a running jump until World 2 and you get 5 stars. By leaving those options open, they create what I've dubbed subjective difficulty. And that is the difficulty of the game is based on the player's knowledge base and expertise at the game. Another good example of that would be Demon's Souls, or pretty much any of the Souls games. Recently, a really good example of gating, which I think could still use a little bit of improvement on, would be Bit Shifter, which by the time you're watching this video, we've already recorded a live stream of the game, which will be up soon on the channel. Bit Shifter is an action strategy game where you're flying around the levels, and what they do is they use metagame design to unlock new items for you to use, which then become available for any levels, while slowly introducing new mechanics, new enemies, etc. And the developers have been doing their best to get that pacing right. And that's one of the bigger parts of this, and probably too big to go into on this length of video. But there's a real balance between pacing things out. If they're too fast, then the player is just overwhelmed by all the new mechanics. But if it's done too slowly, then the player just gets bored and they start to feel like they've seen everything already. And I think that's kind of where Bit Shifter is at now. They've been doing a lot with trying to speed up mechanics and trying to keep the game fresh with having bonus levels and changing things up. But it's still a little bit repetitive in terms of you do go several levels without introducing anything new. And that's another part of the whole gating kind of mechanic, is that there has to always be something new, something on the horizon for the player to go after. It's also another issue that we see in survival or open-ended games where they just basically go, okay, here's the player, go nuts. We're going to give you everything from the start. It's up to you to figure out how things work. And if you die, then you're just going to restart. And it's also why the use of gating is also a major form of progression. You start with, a tier 1 weapon, then you go to tier 2, then tier 3, and so on and so forth. Factorio is another real important use of gating with how they introduce all the different parts of the assembly machine, the assembly line. You start with these basic elements that can be used to make very simple machines, and then if you can get a handle on that, you then get new parts, which can either allow you to build new assembly machines or assembly productions, or you go back to your pre-existing ones and you modify them with these new parts to make them better. And all the while, the player is building up this knowledge base because while they're introduced to the basic building blocks, the advanced stuff is slowly doled out as they progress. And when it's handled correctly, proper gating makes it a lot easier to learn a game compared to, again, either being too slow or introducing everything at once. And while you can't gate strategy games when everything has to be introduced at once, you can still use that as a basic philosophy for your tutorial design. And there are definitely a lot more examples that we could talk about with gating and being used, but like I said, I like to keep these videos to about 10 to 15 minutes. So we'll start to wrap things up. It's important to keep hydrated during these heat waves too. In order to understand and use gating in your own games, and this is more for designers or people interested in learning a little bit more about the foundation or the philosophy side of it, you need to understand the order of importance when it comes to gating mechanics. Essentially, what is the player going to do? What's step one, two, three, four, etc. of how your game plays? Now, that doesn't mean you want to introduce things as, spend one level just talking about moving, and then one level spent on jumping. But it's the order of which the player is going to use these mechanics, and then you need to spend a good amount or a respectable amount of time based on what those mechanics are. You don't need to spend 10 minutes to teach a player how to move using W, S, A, and D, but you may need to spend 3 or 4 minutes if you're trying to teach them how portals work, or how you make use of the swapper device in the swapper, and so on. A really good example of this kind of gating, and one that I keep saying designers should study, is Plants vs. Zombies. PopCap did an amazing job of not only making the game very easy to learn, but then gating everything so that each level introduced something new. Whether it was a new bonus stage, new zombie, new plant, new mechanic, etc. And it just went so well in terms of easing a player into it and keeping their interest. And that's the other part of gating. If you do it right, the player is going to keep being invested into playing the game and not getting bored or feeling overwhelmed. Going back to New and Tasty from a few minutes ago, by introducing these mechanics and not properly explaining them, it creates sort of like a mismatch order in terms of like a hierarchy of learning the game. Like they give me the option of mind control while they're still teaching me how to move and jump and hang onto ledges. And I don't know if this was because of the fact that I'm playing on hard mode, or simply because they did this in order to add the new challenges in, but they really should have introduced these mechanics earlier. And here's a very important thought. It's actually so important I'm going to lean in for it. But you never want to introduce mechanics or have them available before the player has been given a chance of learning them. And that goes for secrets and hidden stuff as well. If you're expecting the player to use a triple jump to get up to like a ledge up here, don't have that before you've actually brought the tutorial of how to use it. And the reason is if the player doesn't know that's even an option, they're never even going to think about doing that. In New and Tasty, and I'm going to talk about this more in the Spotlight video, there are several challenge sections that are introduced before the actual lesson of how to make use of it. And while that's great for returning players, it's not good gating to introduce elements before they're properly explained. In fact, because of that, I thought there were secrets there, but I didn't know they were actually secrets because the game never clued me in to actually think about that. And that's why if you're going to do something that's going to be esoteric or something hidden, it's good to at least make the first one, completely and utterly apparent to the player. Put like big blinking lights saying, here is what's a secret going to look like. Now you need to look for this one that's going to be hidden, but expect to see something like this, or expect to keep an eye out. That way the player is going to build their knowledge so that when you then want to introduce those hidden elements, they'll have an idea of what to expect. And it's not just like thrown out to them and they're like, there was a secret there? How was I supposed to know? And this kind of gating is something that we can talk about a lot more. And we're approaching 15 minutes. I could spend a good 20, 30 minutes talking about it as well. But I know these videos are going to start to run a little bit long if we do that. So I'll bring my little prop out. Put him, I can have him on my shoulder here and keep him up there. There we go. He'll probably fall in like the next minute, so we better wrap this up quick. So, thanks so much for tuning into this critical thought. If you enjoyed it, be sure to share your friends, leave a comment, and of course, like and subscribe to the channel. It always helps out. Be sure to follow me on Twitch and Twitter under GW Bycer for the latest updates and new content. As I said, Mario decided to tumble at that. That means you should definitely do it. Be sure to check out game-wisdom.com, where I examine the art and science of games. You'll find my posts and podcasts there. And lastly, be sure to check me out on Patreon under Game Wisdom. Your donations can not only allow me to keep going while supporting myself financially, but if we can hit some goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy. And by the time you're watching this video, I've put up a new reward for potential pledgers. If you donate $15 or more, you will be part of a special video thank you that I will put up at the end of each month for Patreon supporters. Just a little way of immortalizing you here on the YouTube channel each month. So, thanks again for tuning in. I will switch over to my special thing here. Just that, again, I don't like to end with my weird face. And I will see you all tomorrow with another critical thought. Take care.